Please welcome Austin Butler. Producer, costume designer, production designer, Catherine Martin. And writer, director, producer, Baz Luhrmann. Oh my goodness. My heart is beating so fast. This is so exciting.
Oh my gosh.
So cute.
That's my new best friend.
What is that thing about never appearing on stage with animals or Austin Butler?
Well, thank you for being here. Baz, I was talking to you before we came in about your editing, especially the opening sequence where we feel overwhelmed. There's so much information being told, but what I've always admired about your working with your editors is that there's a clarity with all the embellishments and the craziness. Your storyline is so clear. Can you tell us about working with your editors and honing in the story?
Well, I'm really glad you bring it up, Roger, because no one really does. They're a bit like, that was weird shit. I won't bring that up. But there is absolutely a mechanical science to it. I don't know if it's a science, but it's certainly a storytelling mechanic to it. And actually, it comes from a sort of DNA. I mean, it's too long a story to tell about my whole journey going from being into psychological realism at drama school. I come from an acting teaching background. Kate Blanchett the other night, very, very lovely, she said just in passing, we all come from a non-hierarchical school of actual drama. We all went to the same school. At some point, actually, Kate's older sister was your assistant, wasn't she?
Younger sister.
Oh, she's a younger sister? Correct. Very small country, you get things confused. But anyway, we all went to the same school. Mel Gibson as well. Well, you know, sometimes there's always a bad boy in the class. But anyway, the thing is that, here's the thing. What I became obsessed with through when I did the little play of Strictly Ballroom was sort of the idea of universal, thank you very much. I can date everyone by how many claps there were for Strictly Ballroom, you know that. All right, young kids, I did a little film about 35 years ago. Anyway, the point is that, let me just try and cut to the chase, because we're talking about editing. What happened in the development of the cinematic language was that the play itself was primary myth, and I was exploring that, and I stuck it in a world I knew, which was the world of ballroom dancing. This little play goes to a drama festival before the Soviet Union comes down. It's the first ever Western play that's allowed to go to this drama festival. And in it, it's metaphorical, and it's based on old movie musicals, and it's very theatrical. It's very challenging, it's very fast, and it's very quick. And we thought, gosh, look at those amazing Russian actors. No, we should just pack up and go home. At the end of it, we used to have sort of Brechtian moments in it. You know, at one stage, the whole cast would stop and turn and go, fuck the Federation. And there were tapes of like, at the time, the president was Ronald Reagan, so that gives you an idea how long ago it was, and Maggie Thatcher. Am I losing you here? Let me know.
No, you're not.
All right, and they used to do like Semper Fi, like while we were changing costumes. The point being that we left the stage, and all of the satellite Soviet country students, we went up, we could hear a rumbling. And all of the students ran onto the stage going, bravo, Bulgaria, bravo, Australia. We just didn't know what was going on. And so they read the metaphor, the larger idea. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because when I went to do Strictly Ballroom, very quickly, I started to try, I'm going to do my first movie. I started working with someone who could actually write a movie script. unfortunately, when you bubbled down the metaphorical engagement, it became, and I love Dirty Dancing, but it became a naturalistic kind of dance film. It lost the metaphorical power. The ability for a child to have one reading and an adult to have another and another kind of audience to have another. So then begins the journey of finding a cinematic language that could actually be participatory. How then the editing. So Jill Bilcock joins me. I finally realized I got to reach back into old movies to find a kind of style that is in a way, and I hate this expression postmodern, but I can't think of a better word, right? Which is both old but new. And Jill helps us, and one of those things is most cinema of the style of cinema of our time always begins slow rhythmed. It's almost like you're looking for a keyhole. The naturalistic opening of Strictly Ballroom would be, wide shot, a house, car drives in, credits, mum's got the groceries, Scott, are you getting ready for the ballroom dancing competition tonight? Scott would be in the mirror doing his steps. Yes, mum, I know. And then he'd be going in new suit, and then Dad would be going like, dancing around the blah, 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 new credits, we learn, right? What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to get the audience, how am I going to get them to lean forward, not sit back? How am I going to get them to participate? How am I going to get them to sign on? So I had this idea, what if we're interviewing the main characters about something that's already happened, but as if Scott hadn't broken some ballroom dancing rules, but if Scott was actually a drug addict, oh my God, what, did I fail him as a mother? What did I do, And I cannot tell you how that editorial style that was so sort of challenging to the audience. I mean, you would have thought, honestly, that I had committed some sort of major international, conflict when that film screened in Cannes, where it went on to win Prix, etc. So bottom line is that Jill and I developed this editing style, and actually we do that in Strictly Ballroom, Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, and then Matt Villa and Jonathan Redman, I'm just trying to think how far back they go, were with us from the very beginning. And Jill teaches there's a very particular style of editorial. Now, I will tell you that not everyone, there's always been a bit of, can you just not do that, right? But I've always was touched on the very first time when Anne Coates, I am such a Lawrence of Arabia nut, and she edited that film. And she was the head of the Editors Guild, and she said, do you know, a lot of people are a bit upset about the way Strictly Ballroom's cut. I'm not sure she's even English, but I thought that was a good voice. That way Strictly Ballroom's cut, but I liked it because it's singular, it's strong, the chops are absolute, and it's doing something. It's making us lean forward. And from that moment on, I realized that was, in fact, something that I would continue to pursue. And there is the final moment in the editorial first 20 minutes where you, the audience, have either got, in each of the movies, where you either got to sign on, lean forward, and come on the ride. You live near the ocean here, right? They surf, right? I don't. But in surfing, from what I know, you paddle, right? You have to make some effort. But if you catch the wave, it takes you all the way through. That's what the mechanics of that editing is about. Was that too long an answer?
I love it. Is there, how difficult is for you to arrive to the final edit where there is all this bits of information that are relevant? In the first scene, we find out that we're seeing it through Parker's eyes. We find that we go from the 90s to the 70s. There is so much happening. Is that something that you arrive right away in the editing from the get-go, or is trial and error and finessing?
Editorially later, it's essentially finessing. There's some moving around. I will tell you, I think you're always writing. I think I live the films, I research the films. I think you're right to, I don't know if we're quoting Amadeus, but if you think of Amadeus, being a great Shakespeare aficionado where he'll take a historical figure and he'll explore a larger idea. Amadeus, you learn so much about Mozart. Does it matter whether you like Mozart's music or not? It helps. You probably will end up liking his music at the end. But really, when Salieri says, he tells a story. You know Salieri, but not much. Anyone know Mozart? Absolutely. You know this tune? No. You know this tune? No. What about this one? Tune. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, that's Mozart. And I did everything right, God. And you put genius in that little pig. From this moment on, God, you and I are enemies. Now that, my friends, is drama, you know? And dramatization through a mechanism. So I tell you something, though. I didn't have it solved. And the pandemic has been an incredibly terrible thing, particularly to young people. But there have been some silver linings. I think just forget movies and storytelling. I think in the human condition, the preciousness of being able to come together in a dark room and share laughter and tears and commune in theatre, whether it's on the screen or in any other form, you know? The preciousness, we're doing this again, you know? We're doing this again. But I was very lucky because I really hadn't solved the first act, and I knew somehow we needed to find Elvis not in Sun Studios. And actually I found that out because during the process of trying to get out of doing the movie by being sure I would never find an Elvis and workshopping with different possibilities, and then the miracle here walks in. Miracle, do you remember we had that terrible scene I kept making you do? You have helped me realize something was wrong. You remember it was about the hair and we're in Sun Studios and, you know, you made it work, but it was not a good scene, right? And
I blame myself.
and you revealed the flaws, and I'm not even kidding. In the pandemic, I realized, you see, to discover what happened in Sun Studios is the musical epiphany. But the epiphany of Elvis is the whole package. It's Elvis on stage. It's his relationship to the Pentecostal 10. Those stories that you see in the movie, I've discovered the young boy. He told me that story verbatim about the preacher and looking in the tent and grabbing me with the Spirit. So the long and the short of it is, I go in with a really strong text. We prepare. Deep collaborations. I wish Mandy Walker was here, the DP, because she was there when we were workshopping 2 years before we did the movie. Yeah. I wish my editors were here. They were there when we were workshopping 2 years before. Everyone was there 2 years before. Sam was there 35 years before, right? We've been like collaborating for quite a long time.
Amazing. Catherine, I'm in awe of what you do. I was blown away that you balance historical accuracy in your designs, but at the same time, we're seeing it through the eyes of a memory of the kernel, but also you modernize it to keep it relevant. Can you tell us about balancing, you know, those aspects?
Baz was extremely clear that with Elvis, a contemporary audience needed to understand his newness, his punkness, his immediacy, his shockingness, the shocking sensuality of his movement, the fact that he was challenging all these kind of parental mores, and the electrifying reaction that girls were having to him, this kind of burgeoning sexual revolution, if you will. And he made a very good observation that all of the vernacular of Elvis's clothing is basically touchstones of men's sartorial style. So those things had been lost in the mist of time. So if we were just to, we needed to discover in the language of the history of Elvis's clothing a way of connecting a modern audience to this. And so Baz is hugely research driven. We all go on a big research journey. And it was really about examining the true wardrobe of Elvis to actually find things that were part of the language of what he actually wore at the time of, you know, when he's in the pink suit and he's at the hayride, to find things that would connect with a modern audience. So it's actually a process, I suppose, of natural selection, we call it. So he did wear lace shirts. He did wear those Hollywood jackets that are kind of a shacket, you know. It's a shacket. It's a shirt and a jacket mixed together.
I'm going to use that word one day. I'm going to tell someone it's shacket.
It's a shacket. And
I've been on this 10 years. I never heard you say it was a shacket.
do you know what makes it a shacket?
Please enlighten me.
Okay, well, it has cuffs, you know, and buttons, and it has really, it's an unlined jacket. So it was popularised.
I get that now. It's like a smize.
It's like a smize. We were trying to smize last night. I failed. Anyway, I'm rambling on too.
But Catherine, I've been dying to ask you this question. You make the connection with the past and the present, but you also, the connection between characters. There's one scene that I noticed after Elvis's mother dies, that the lace, and he starts wearing lace shirts, and that
Yes.
we see the connection between the mother and Elvis. Can you talk about making those connections?
Well, I had an incredible experience at Graceland in the archives because we were really lucky to have extraordinary access. And Gladys is a huge part of the movie and a huge part of Elvis's life and how he was formed as a person. And I kind of really wanted to understand who she was, and I asked to see some of her clothes, and they're all put into beautiful archive boxes, all in kind of archival tissue paper. And I remember opening the box and getting this overwhelming sadness just came out of the box, a kind of a longing. It was almost like unrequited love had been bottled, and there was a kind of a sadness, and she loved mauve and purple. Her room was purple. She loved a kind of fussy neckline. And allegedly in her youth, from what I've read, she was also a really good dancer and loved to get dressed up and was a flapper. And I think life ground her down for many reasons. I think losing a son and maybe not the most perfect relationship with her husband or whatever, but I think certainly Elvis got movement and a love of beautiful things from his mother. And even though that was expressed in a very simple way with her, Elvis certainly did that. And I think too, she loved him so much and was so supportive. She made no judgment. So his choice to wear something that was a lace shirt in the early 50s, and he even tied it up like a midriff style, and that she would make no judgment about that. She would just think he looked amazing. And I think that gave him confidence. I would say there are two things, and you know much more about Elvis than me, Austin, but I always look at Elvis and I think there are two things that he was so doubtful of so many things, but the way he dressed, his choices, his ability to style himself before there was even a stylist, he never wavered. He thought, I need to look like this, and he made no judgment about it and expressed himself how he felt, and his music. I think he felt incredibly confident in those two areas of his life. And he understood the power of those two things coming together. And I think it's his mother's unwavering support. And I think she says a line in the film which she says, you know, neither of them understand why people are so upset about the allegedly sexual way that he moves on stage. She is entirely supportive of the way that he performs, even though, you know, she's a relatively conservative religious woman from the South.
Austin, you do not impersonate Elvis. You sort of liberate our vision of Elvis. Can you walk us through your approach, this daunting task to, create this Elvis?
Yeah, it was a long process. I was very fortunate for that, because when I look back at it, I realized I had different chapters of it, where at first it was just absorbing everything. And there's so much footage out there, and there's so many images, and there's so many audio recordings. And so I started having to break it into pieces. So you have different periods of his life when he changed the way that he moved, or you hear how his voice changed over time. And then it was reading. I mean, so many psychologists have written incredible books on his inner world, and then I just started to find these keys into the humanity of him, because I knew that if I focused on the external things that, and I did. I had times where I had this unrealistic expectation that if I somehow contorted my face and figured out how to work the muscles of my face, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between my face and Elvis's face. And then I realized that's not what is most important. There's all the meticulous nature of how he used his hands and how he used his eyes, and how his body moved on stage, and when he was sitting around the dinner table, or any of those things. But it had to be his soul and his humanity. And there's so many things. I mean, just hearing you talk about Gladys's dancing made me remember the detail of the fact that Elvis, when he was in the womb with Jessie, his mother would go dancing, and she would do this thing called buck dancing, which was this sort of spiritual rapture sort of dancing, where you're kicking your feet out and you're moving in this very religious, spiritual way. And she would dance for 8 hours straight when she was pregnant. And this one psychologist had this thing that I realized is that the first human contact that he would have ever had was sloshing around in his mother's belly, touching Jessie. So that oxytocin, all those chemicals that are being released of human contact that we all crave, are while through his mother's stomach, he's hearing this spiritual music. And so things like that, where it just makes you go, okay, so then how can I connect to that? And Baz and Sam and I, we went down to Nashville and recorded all the gospel numbers, and that was one of the most extraordinary experiences, because in a similar way to what you see in the gospel tent with Elvis, that song that's in the film, I was in the room as that was being recorded. And so we had 30 of the most incredible gospel singers that were led by this man named Shannon, who before they started singing, he said, "We're not just recording songs today. We're not just making a movie. We got something, we all have something to wail about right now, so let's wail." He said, "A family member of mine is dying right now, and they may not be alive when I come out of here, so I got something to wail about." And then they just started singing, and it wasn't song and then stop and think about it and go to the next. They would just seamlessly move between these spiritual numbers. Wow. And we were in this little wooden church that was built in the 1800s, in the middle of outside of Nashville. And I stood in the center, and at a certain point, I just got chills down my spine, and they're all stomping their feet. And so I started stomping my feet. Tears are pouring down my face. And it was moments like that, because I didn't understand dancing before. I've always been very shy, and I've always been sort of a wallflower at a party, and I don't like getting on the dance floor. So I was perfect to play Elvis. So I didn't ever dance, but it was moments like that where I realized what it actually is. It's when the music is moving you, not you doing choreography to a song. That's sort of like putting something on top of something else.
Which I had a question that you sort of answered, the fact that when he's on stage visually, he feels, I'm using the term liberated again, he seems so liberated.
Yeah.
Was that daunting for you to tap into that liberation of him on stage?
The entire experience was daunting, but I think that's one of those things that you can't plan for it really. You do all the homework, and then you show up and you sort of surrender to that liberation. And so for me, I couldn't predict what was going to happen on stage. I did all the work as far as working with Polly Bennett, my incredible movement coach and therapist, and she was by my side the whole time, and we did so many technical things. I mean, we did tap dancing just to get dexterity in my feet, or she'd turn on a song and say, only listen to the drums right now, only listen to the bass, and see where it moves your body. And so it was a lot of me exploring myself, but then you get on stage and somehow it transcends what you think a moment might be.
I saw you do this interview where you talked about recording yourself as in an interview that you're you're being interviewed as Elvis.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? And
That's when I was losing my mind during COVID. I was in my apartment by myself, and I thought, how can I try other things? What can I do? And I'd already wallpapered my entire apartment like some sort of maniac with only pictures of Elvis, and it looked like a crime scene or something. And so I'd done that because I wanted the timeline of his entire life. And then usually every day I would wake up, and those 6 months that the film shut down turned out to be a huge gift for me, because I went from, prior to that, for a year, I'd been studying every day, but I felt like a student. I felt like I was working with my karate instructor, and I was working with Polly, my movement coach, and my singing coach, and dialect coach, and all these amazing people around me that I was so fortunate to get to work with. But I have this quality in me where I want to be a good student for them. And so I want to be able to tap dance how you're teaching me. And then when the film shut down and suddenly it was just me in my room by myself, I would wake up around 3 or 4 in the morning, my heart pounding, feeling terror. And I would just sort of go, okay, what's terrifying me? Oh, it's this one interview that he did. You know, I can't quite figure out how he says that word. Or what is his phrasing on that? And I would usually wake up with a song or an interview or something, or his laugh, going, how do you laugh? How do you find that laugh inside? And then I would just explore that. And sometimes I'd do it all day, or I'd walk down the beach just laughing as Elvis for hours, or like I said, I was losing my mind. But I set up a camera, and I would the Hyde Gardner interview where Elvis was talking about how everything happened so fast, and I would find the exact camera angle and then record myself and watch it back and see if I saw an impersonation or if I saw me trying to do all the external things. Because by the time that you're doing it, those things have to be so in your marrow that you're not thinking about them, that it's feeling like it's happening right now for the very first time, and that's so tricky. So that was one of the things I did, yeah.
Baz, you mentioned your cinematographer, Mandy Walker, and I'm curious about how you guys arrived about the look. The first half of the film is a different palette, is subdued, and reminds me of Gordon Parks' photography. And then by the time we get to Vegas, you use anamorphic lenses, and it's brighter colors. You know, can you tell us about the transitions?
Well, yes. But just very quickly, just because
Yeah,
you
go
can't
ahead.
say it. And it's funny because we've been doing quite a few of these, but every now and then something happens where you go like, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, I forgot that. You know, when Sim was talking about the mother moment, like that happened 4 years ago, and I could see you going like, yeah. Right. He can't say it, but I think it needs to be said. You know, we worked for years. We were holding such a big deal in our hands. You know, there wasn't a lot of, and I can say this in front of Austin, there wasn't a lot of, Austin Butler, perfect for Elvis out there. And he had a lot of weight on his shoulders. And we had a lot of weight on our shoulders because, believe it or not, we're not from around here. We're not locals. And so the wait was there, and just the day before we went to shoot, Tom Hanks was doing that scene we were rehearsing where he guides Austin through the crowd and all the girls are kissing him at Vegas. My AD says, oh, I think Tom's got that flu thing. And boom, shut down and all of that. And so what Austin told you there was, Tom got ill, the film shut down, the film was over because no one knew when it was going to end. I was locked in an estate, kind of enjoying dressing up and drinking cocktails for the first few days. But then there's
More than a few days, Baz.
Okay. Okay.
You were the life of the party.
I was working on Gatsby the sequel, but Zelda. It's not like she didn't have
Pussycat.
It's not like she didn't have her problems. Anyway, when we come back from the break, here's what really happened. I think I don't know how I got out of the hooscows, we used to call it, which was, at some point the state locked down, and Tom went back, and he was iller than he let on. He was really leading the charge. What a king to have on your movie. What a leader. And he went back with Rita, who was also suffering. But I could not hold the cast together, and no one knew what was going to happen. And we were making a movie for the cinema. I had cut a deal where I said, I am not having this going on streaming first, or I'm not doing it because I don't make them very often. I said, it's got to be for the cinema. And we knew that was kind of if not a holy grail, it was certainly a very, very important mission we were on. But it was over. And I had to go to Austin and say, Austin, after 2 years of work, probably sometime maybe in the future, but right now this film, you better go home. We got to send you home. He said, I'm not leaving. And I'm not going to talk about why I think you have there's many reasons why you have such a truly, deeply spiritual connection to this role, and why it can be seen as a catchphrase, but you were born to play this role. Why it's almost not a natural progression as to why you landed here to reveal this person to us in the way you did. But he said, I'm not leaving, I'm staying. And then he goes into what he just described then, which is, I guess, the beautiful mind moment, right? The musical. But, and he doubled down. He doubled down. And I want to say to you now here, because sometimes you never catch up, was that it was your doubling down that made me stop going like, whew, I'm off the hook. I can pretend to be F. Scott Fitzgerald and, drink martinis and wear a white suit. That made me feel like there's a vortex suddenly underneath me, like it's going away. And that did not feel good. And I rang Tom, and Tom said, I know, we've got to try and pull this back together again. He said, well, why don't we wait until February when this is all over? That was 2 years ago. And I found out it wasn't all over. And then I said, Austin's still here. He said, can you get it done by Christmas? I said, yes. And Tom came back, and we all came back together. And from that moment on, it was the smoothest shoot I've ever been on, and it came in on time and under budget, and that has never happened to me in my life before.
Right.
So I thank you for that. Back to Mandy. Deep collaborations on every level. We all sort of multitask a bit. Sure, Mandy is the DP, but I'm so interested in what she thinks about a moment of performance. You see, Emmy is the production designer and the costume designer. She's also a producer, and she isn't that because she's my wife, right? Although she did produce a couple of nice kids. But that was a collaboration, by the way. It was, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just checking.
And sometimes they're nice.
Yeah. Anyway, let's not do family therapy, all right? We also have a dog. It's a controversial issue. I love Doggy. The thing is that deep collaboration. So Mandy was there when we were doing the workshops 2 years earlier. And what we decided, and this kind of clicks in my mind a bit about Mandy because she's so affable. She's got that terrible Aussie affliction of being affable and nice, right? You know, sometimes people think it's annoying because Aussies can be quite nice, you know. But by God, is she hardworking and maybe one of the strongest collaborators and film technicians and practitioners I've ever met. She's been in the middle of a desert in 1,000-degree heat when all these blokes have been unconscious on their backs, not able to stand up, and she's holding the camera herself during some cattle stampede with, you know, a temperature of 102 because she's got a cold with stuff dribbling out of there, looking pretty cool, shooting and going like, yeah, Baz, what do you reckon? You know, like, she is so strong of will. And one of her strengths was we talked about the language and the visual language of the film. So not only did she do the research, but she went and got lenses made that matched the actual lenses of the 50s, the 60s, and then we went to anamorphic and had the same lenses made for the anamorphic. Even when we were doing the comeback special, the level of deep research she did, she put cameras inside those TV cameras. Our digital cameras inside those TV cameras. She had the entire blokesy group around her learn every Elvis song. And so the camera could dance. And let me tell you something about what she got out of that team. You know, we rehearsed, and the first thing we shot was the Vegas opening concert, you know, where Elvis walks from backstage, he picks up the guitar and he goes on, he does the concert. And it was the first day shooting, something like that, maybe the second day, I don't know. But her team was all ready. We had multiple cameras. I mean, one stage, you know, that we rehearse it and we're very prepped. But if I say now, you know, like, hey, let's let them overlap and let's run from one set to another during the argument scene so we don't have to break the emotion of it, which we did, the crew were able to go like, that's weird, but let's do it, right? So we're on this day, we're shooting the scene, and we have all the cameras set up. We've built the showroom. We call action. Austin's been doing this so much. And he walks as Elvis. All the cameras. We had every single, it's called Train Spotting. It's identical to exactly the documentary that everyone knows very famously. Elvis walks on the stage. Austin goes on and performs the entire concert. And when you talk about out-of-body experiences, there's this guy in Mandy's team. His name's Brett. And he pushes the camera around as a grip. And he's worked for me over 35 years, I think, or 30 years. And he said about 6 words to me in that 35 years, you know? Like, usually something like, hey, boss, be careful, you'll get squashed, mate, right? And at the end of it, he goes, oh, mate, I'm sorry, boss, I think I've done it all. I've done the Star Wars, and I've done the Thin Red Line with, you know, Terry Malick, and the Supermans. I've done them all, but I didn't know what was happening there. I felt I was having an out of body, so I was shaking. I think I shook the camera. I said, "It's all right, Brad. We all had an out of body experience. We're going to do a second take." That's how incredible her team is, and she leads them like a general. And honestly, there's nothing Mandy won't do, because we had to do exact copies of things, and then we had to change the camera language to match Austin and the gift he gave us. And this is the greatest thing that came from Priscilla. She says to me, she didn't believe that this kid could do it. And when that nervy screen, she said, the movement and all of that, that was amazing to me. But how did that young man, I don't know who he is, how did he know the stillness inside of us? How did he know his rage? That's not on any film. That's not in any book. How did he do that? And I had to say, I don't know. But Mandy would respond to what Austin gave. And when that camera's really still at the end, you know, when Vernon comes in, it's just sitting there. And the curtains close, and Austin just moves through the frame. That's Mandy attuned to the inner life of the actor. So that's just how deep the collaboration is. And that's how symbiotic we all are. It's a we thing, certainly not a me thing. It's a we thing.
And I think just Mandy brings such incredible spirit to a production. She's an enthusiast. She is a total collaborator, and she actually inspires me every day, because I can get bitter and twisted sometimes. I know it's hard to believe, but I can. And she is never that way. And when you think she works in an industry that is so male-dominated, So you can imagine. And her, you know, she just keeps that joie de vivre, a sense of humour, endless enthusiast. You know, if you get pushed down the mountainside and everyone's giving up, Mandy will be the first one to be leading the charge back up the hill. But I remember being on set on this show with our teenage daughter and seeing Mandy on the dolly being pushed by all her grips who are all men. And I said to my daughter, and it just made me feel so proud of her, and it made me feel like I was able to show our daughter something extraordinary. I said, do you see that? That's a historical moment. That's a woman, director of photography, top of her game, who shoots enormous films. She's behind the dolly, using the camera herself, and her team are men. And in that moment, I thought there is potential, there is the future, there is diversity, there is difference, and you don't need to be mean to be successful.
I have so many questions to ask you guys, but I'm being told there's a time constraint. I do have to ask you about Baz and Austin. The choice of Unchained Melody, that we see Austin, and then it moves to the real Elvis. And I'd love to hear how you came about doing that, and then from Austin, you know, living that moment and performing that moment.
I'll try and do it succinctly and stay on point. But you have seen my movies, right? The thing is, I had complete freedom. I want you to understand that the estate is actually not owned by the Presleys. I mean, Lisa Marie has a real agency in the building called Graceland. But actually, I had complete freedom to tell the story the way I saw it. But very early on, it became apparent to me when I saw that video 5 years ago. I mean, that video of Elvis singing is the last time he sings. He's dead but a few months later, I think a few weeks. And what's so incredible about it is the body is corrupt, the mind is befuddled, but when he sits down and sings and he looks at the audience, he smiles like a little boy whose father went to jail, who was dripped in shame, who was so poor they had to live in one of the few white houses in the black community. It's in the movie, you just saw it. And he's addicted to superheroes, and that little boy is going like, you know, am I good? And of course he's good, he's incredible, it soars. So we cut a reel, talking about depth of collaboration. I said with Jono and Matt, Jono cut a reel, the feel of the film. And I said, remember, Jono, we cut it, 2 years ago. He said 5, Baz, 5 years ago. I went, you know me, time, numbers, us, the studio, not my strength. But the thing is, I wanted to use that real footage at the end. And there was the only time from the estate, the guys that don't know, we were like, that's not an Elvis we want people to see. I said, no, that's the Elvis we all need to see. Because even though he's caught in a trap and he can't get out and he doesn't know why, that Elvis inside that corrupted body is the Elvis you want to be left with. So we cut the reel, and you see the pictures where you see beautiful Elvis, young Elvis, as you flash to it. There was a bit of pushback. And we're like, well, you know what? If we don't use the footage, Austin will do that scene. He's going to do that scene. And I'm like, wow, can we really make Austin look that corrupted? And I was thinking like, absolutely, right? Because ironically, the reason I came to see Austin was he sent a video of himself weeping in a bathrobe, singing that number before he'd ever met me. He had no idea that's how we were going to finish the movie. So go figure that. I don't know how that happened. I mean, what is that work there? And so we get Austin, we start doing tests and everything. I remember I actually videoed him in the makeup room. I turned all the lights out. I've got this video. It's kind of brilliant, actually, if I say so myself. Right. Well, you're brilliant in it because we're in the makeup room. I turn the lights out and we hold a lot of it. He's going, and then he gets up. We've got the light, and because the light's kicking back, we probably could have used that footage and not shot the whole scene. Anyway, he's got to do it, and he shoots it. And if you look at the scene, we reproduce it perfectly. Again, Mandy Walker's collaboration, everyone's collaboration. But we're there, and we've got the movie, and I think, now Austin is so good at this, but we must, of course, the trope is let's usually see the real character in the credits. So you go, oh, he really existed? Oh, how well did we do? We're in the edit room, and someone's like, no, that's not good. And Jono took this piece of stuff that he cut 5 years earlier, and all of a sudden he said, what if we flick to there then? Boom. And it was just, for me, astounding. I just went, I just had a visceral gut punch. So how did you do that performance?
Well, first of all, I didn't know that you did that until I saw the film for the first time at Cannes. I waited to watch the film until we were sitting in that theater in Cannes. It was very nerve-wracking for me.
Nerve-wracking for you. You cried next to me for 2.5 hours. It was
God.
I was like, oh my God.
I just couldn't believe it. So when that moment happened, it just broke my heart because I've never been able to watch that footage of him singing Unchained Melody without weeping. There's that thing of, like you said, his body's so corrupted, and but he still has that childlike glimmer in his eye. And when he's saying, "I need your love," and he looks out at the audience, and you see that beautiful young man inside of him, and you realize that was 77. I mean, 7 years prior, he looks like a god on stage in Vegas. And how does that happen? And so it just always breaks my heart. And I had a personal connection to that song because of a story that I've told many times. But when I was trying to figure out what to send to Baz, when I heard that he was making the film, I had this nightmare about my mother passing away again. And my mom died when I was 23, and that's how old Elvis was when he lost his mom. And so that was the first thing that I just knew. I knew that emotion so deeply, and so it humanized him and beyond any other way. And it was my first door in. And so I had this nightmare, and then I woke up from that. And I thought either it's going to be an awful day or I've got to do something with this fresh grief that now I'm feeling. And the first thing I thought of was Unchained Melody, and a song that I'd always heard as a romantic song to a partner. But in that moment, I thought I could sing those same words to my mother right now. And so I went to the piano, and I'd just woken up, and my hair was a mess. And I sat down at the piano, and I started playing, and I just sang that song, and I allowed all that pain to come out. And then I sent that to Baz, and that's what first connected us. I had no idea that was the last moment in the film. So I think it was just a combination of my very, the personal stuff and that, the studying of the footage for a year and a half, and then, all the amazing people around us, and the way that the attention to detail that you and Mandy and Catherine Martin here and the entire team put together to make sure that the angles were just right, and all that was on the piano was perfect. And I mean, what you did with the clothing on everybody around me, I mean, it was just, it's surreal when you look out, when I'm looking out of my eyes, and I think this is exactly what Elvis saw. Besides the fact that maybe we don't have a giant audience in the auditorium, but I'm looking at all the details, and it grounds you in the reality of it, and suddenly it doesn't feel like you're playing pretend or trying to copy something, but it feels
could I
like
just ask you a really quick question? Yeah. Super fast. So this is something I had never asked you, and it just came to me in a flash. So just remember we were shooting, and we set it all up, and everything was identical. And we'd done tests before, but you walked out. We weren't even shooting. The cameras went on, and you walked out in the whole look. And you walked out, and, I was conscious of things like heat and, being all this sort of stuff, and huge, and everyone like cranes and all that stuff. But then you walked out, And you came out, and the way you looked, you know, like I'd been living with you as young Elvis, as Elvis at Vegas, and then you came out. And I remember looking at you, and you smiled at me like this. And I don't know to this day, and I've never asked you this, whether it was you, Austin, smiling, going, look, I'm still Austin inside, or whether actually I saw one moment of Elvis on this really obscure documentary. You know that one where he's in a casino and there's a little girl and there's really a lot of weight on it, and he's kind of smiling. And you know that thing of like when someone is like Elvis always cared so much about the way he looked, and obviously is hugely, hugely embarrassed about the way he looked. And I've never knew whether it was actually you a bit embarrassed about the way you looked, or whether, well, I suppose, you were in character for 2.5 years, so I suppose you were Elvis. But the point is that it was kind of, I really felt, gee, I hope we get this over soon, because this must be, I don't know, there was a moment when I was way before we got even near the camera, I just felt so like, I thought you were suffering or something, or they were uncomfortable or something. I don't know. I was really confused by it, and I'm never confused.
Well, no, you aren't. I think it's that thing of life imitating art and going back and forth. It starts to blend so deeply that, yes, I was uncomfortable. I mean, physically, we had this, what Catherine Martin lovingly refers to as a body adjustment suit, not a fat suit. And when you put a jumpsuit on over that, it crushes your rib cage, so you cannot breathe. And I was in hair and makeup for 8 hours before, and all I was doing was watching that footage, and yeah, from about 4 or 5 in the morning, and so I was trying to ground myself in where he was emotionally and spiritually at that point. But then there are other physical things that at the time, when I first put it on and we finally zipped it up, I remember thinking, I could have a panic attack because I can't breathe right now. And then as you're watching the footage, you see that he can't breathe. He's being strapped in. And so it all starts to merge, and suddenly I'm having to breathe extra because I can't hardly move, and all of that, you know, plays into it.
So how the hell did he actually sing like that for the last time in his life? Is that a miracle? I mean, how did he do that?
And also, none of us were very sensitive that morning, I think, to what poor Austin was going through, because people would come in and go, oh my God, Austin, you look terrible.
Really let yourself go.
You've let yourself go, and thinking it was hilarious, but he was like, this was bad. It really was. He was suffering, but people would just go in and go, oh, and walk out.
I think the look on your face was a bit like, I know I don't look my best today. No, it was so strange. And then we all just had to go to work. We just had to click in and go to work, and then everything changed. Like we were just in that piece of video that was shot on that day, you know.
And it's brilliant, but we do have to wrap up. And it's rare for. I mean, I mentioned to you, I have idolized you, and I adore your films. I've taught your films, Catherine. You're the cat's pajamas. You're amazing, and it's such a.
Thank you.
It's a dream come true to have you guys here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.